Welcome back to ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. This is Steve Guttman's Garage. Today we're going to review The Law According to Lidia Poët, which is really an interesting movie and discussion. She was a courageous Italian woman lawyer who lived from 1855 to 1949. And this movie is it's not necessarily all true, but it's the arc of her life. And it's really interesting. Yeah, welcome to the show, Steve. Your show.
Thank you.
And great to have you here to discuss this movie, because I think this movie is absolutely worth discussing. And I want to tell you in advance, I give this movie a 10 at least. I love this movie. I'll tell you why later. But first, you have to tell me the environment, the circumstances of this movie.
Well, the circumstances are that prior to Lydia, there were no female lawyers in Italy, and she was allowed to graduate from University of Turin, the law school, and took the exam and passed the exam. I think it was like there's 50 people that vote. And she got 45 out of the 50 that voted for her. And she started practicing law. And from the storyline, and let me back up a second. We're talking about a real person here. This is somebody that actually existed. And she was being successful in her practice of law. And the attorney general for Turin was not happy with her practicing and took steps to have her license revoked, and was successful. And what the 4-part series is about the 3 months that she was, and for a period of time afterwards, she was allowed to practice, because once the license was pulled, it wasn't until 1920 that she finally got licensed. She was 28 years old when she got licensed originally. Come 1920, she's 65 years old, so 37 years of her life were gone. But the storyline focuses totally on those approximately a year period where she first was licensed, then got pulled, and she was able to work things through while she was appealing the decision for the license. She comes from a family of lawyers. Her brother was a lawyer. Apparently, the family itself was very politically active. So she was still able to help people because of the brother connection. But once the final ruling was made that she was not going to be allowed to practice law, that was it until 1920.
Yeah. Wow. And wow, she's like 65 years old at the time. She worked all her life as an activist for women's rights and women lawyers' rights. It was quite something. And you got the outline of that in the movie, in the series. It's a short series, but a lot of it was dramatized, and that's okay. So, what did you think of the dramatization?
Well, it was very different approach than you see in the law shows made, like Law and Order and other lawyer shows here in the United States. But you also had a lot of the background story about the family and the family dynamic, and the interaction between her brother, she basically had a pull into support roles in each of the episodes. It also had a kind of a Perry Mason attitude to it, because everybody else thinks she's representing people that are guilty, and then lo and behold, she gets the guilty person to admit to their guilt. I mean, it was that part was kind of amusing, because you haven't seen that occurring in the American dramas since Perry Mason.
I was watching part of it before our show to prepare for our show today, and I found myself smiling and laughing uh, right through it, and want to analyze with you. I don't know if you had the same reaction. I want to analyze with you why you could have that kind of reaction to this movie. First of all, there's the character herself, played by Matilda De Angelis, who none of the reviews that I looked at actually called her beautiful, but I considered her beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. She's an Italian actress, but it's more than just a physical beauty. She had such a personality.
Oh, she dominated when she's on.
Yeah. But, one of the reviews said that although she dominated when she's on, and you can't take your eyes off her, it's not just the beauty, it's the personality. She got this Italian thing. And they all have this Italian, it's an Italian movie. Although there's some question about whether it was funded by some organization in Greenland, believe it or not. But it was that there was this kind of sense of humor that pervaded in the writing and in the acting and the grimaces that she engaged with the other characters, and they were all very Italian, very fun-loving, even though it was a series of murder mysteries that was really fun-loving. So she was Matilda De Angelis played Lidia Poët. Her brother, who I found very interesting, he was very Italian. Enrico Poët, her brother, played by Pierluigi Pacino. Her lover, to the extent that she had a primary lover, was Andrea, and he was played by Dario Alta, and the journalist who she engaged with, who was, I guess, he was married to somebody in the family, Jacopo, played by Eduardo Scarpetta. You can see from the names, they're all Italian. They all have Italian cultural things, the way they react to each other. And it was so humorous, so fun. This is a murder mystery which was fun all the way through. And I found myself smiling and laughing right through the movie. And she, of course, was the center of it. But what one reviewer said, she was the center. She occupies your attention the whole movie, but she allows the other people to have their time and their space on the screen
definitely.
Also, So they all had huge, big personalities. And so it really filled the screen. So I thought it was well written. I thought, I don't know if you noticed, Steve, but she never wore the same outfit twice, which was making a statement about fashion in the 19th century in Turin, in Italy. Italy's a fashion center, and it was then, 1883 or so. It was very well made. The production values were very high. The lighting and the makeup, and the way they did their hair. And to me, I think it's sort of like opera. In opera, the measure of whether it's a good production is the attention to detail. And this was a movie that really paid attention to historical detail, right down to the last detail of every scene, every act. And I really, if you watch it carefully, it teaches you what life was like in those days, how they lived, how they talked to each other, and so forth.
At least for the upper class, this was definitely a very wealthy family. They lived well. They ate well. It was not. There were some fleeting scenes that, in terms of the average person, but it really concentrated on the elite. So.
Now that house. That house was magnificent. I kept wondering where the producers found that house. That was a spectacular mansion.
Yes,
it looked like it was a period mansion. It was probably a house that existed in 1883. It looked old and yet, very
well preserved.
well-preserved, luxurious house. And all the furniture and the art in the house and, the way they lived, the way they ate at the table, the way they talked to each other. I think what was interesting, though, is the dialogue. Now, this is all written, as an Italian movie. The dialogue was pretty ripe, and they cursed at each other. And at first you say, oh, this is just an old story, bristling with modern cursing. But then you wonder, maybe they cursed like that back in 1883. Why not?
Well, it was interesting, the interaction with the brother and the brother's wife. I mean, the brother's wife was very conservative, was just the opposite in terms of her politics of Lydia. And the contrast was always interesting. But it was always civil, even when there was some foul language being said between them. So it always kept your attention all the way through. And there wasn't that much in terms of actual courtroom scenes, even though it's the title's The Law According to. It mostly was what Lydia needed to do to prove up why her client was innocent. So you had a whole lot of scenes that were outside the courtroom. I didn't have a stopwatch, but I'm sure way over half the movie is outside a courtroom.
Yeah, when she's interviewing people, including in their cells, and it's an interesting juxtaposition between the mansion and the people in the prisons and various murders that she solved, and the people, like on the streets. That was a view into what it was like to be common folk in Turin at the time. It wasn't so pretty, and they didn't live well, and a lot of them were missing teeth, and it was very, very realistic. Yeah, I think that it was a study of what Turin was like, and I felt after the movie that I really understood more about what an Italian city like Turin was like in the 19th century, not only in terms of the physical detail of it and the way people lived, including the rich and the poor, but also the way they engaged and what it was like to be Italian in those days. But the primary thing happening here was this outrageous business about how the Italians would not let women be lawyers. And they kind of last on the list because there were other countries in Europe that were letting women be lawyers.
They expressly referenced, and they expressly commented about America. And there was an American female lawyer that they referenced more than once, but not enough times that I honestly remember the lady's name. But they wanted to be very clear that they were not going to adopt America, the liberalism of America as to and to make such a liberal place. And back in 1883, 1885, America was not very liberal for women. I mean, you look at the history of women practicing law in the United States, and that's really a even though there was always a few that were licensed, it was definitely the exception. And now the majority of people in law school are female, at least in the United States.
That's what happened in my school. We started out with just a handful in my first year of law school. By the time we got to the third year, the balance had changed, and there were a lot of women by then. Furthermore, the women did very well in my law school. They populated the law review. They were the best students and got the best grades by far. I mean, I'm saying, the group of women that stuck together on the law review in the study groups.
Yeah, but you look at like this story of Sandra O'Connor, who was law review, graduated with honors, and when she got out and started to interview, all she got was job offers as a legal secretary, no, none of the major law firms would hire her as a lawyer. So we licensed women, but we weren't exactly opening it up to women. So
Yeah, and one of the things about this is the people around her, around Lydia, that is the judges, civil law, the judge has so much power. The judge is more, he's not reactive. The judge or she, and well, there were no women judges, believe me, not in, not in the
no,
19th century.
again, yeah,
But the judges in this movie, the Italian judges, they were caricatures, and the prosecutors were caricatures. They were unmovable, and the people who ruled on her application and the attempt, the motion to disbar her and all that, they were caricatures. They never changed, from until what you say 1920. They were stuck in it. And I found that very interesting. But at the same time, and the reviewers will bear me out on this, she changed. Her character, grew more activist as you go down the movie, and that's faithful to her life. She became more and more the activist. And what's interesting too is her brother, Enrico.
He changed even more.
Yes, yes, and that's art as far as I'm concerned. When you see the characters change right in front of your eyes, and you begin to understand, the forces on them, the human experiment, the human experience, where the characters are changing because of certain vectors surrounding them. That would be in fiction, but in this case, it's in fact also.
Yeah, and all the cases were criminal. There was really no civil litigation that she was involved with, and where the brother you got the sense was much more of a civil litigator, and so he was not at all comfortable, especially at the beginning, with the tactics that Lydia was using in order to try to prove up. And under the Italian system, once somebody is charged, there's no presumption of innocence.
Yeah, that was a civil law system, and as it existed in the 19th century. What is interesting, and I hadn't thought of this before, Steve, is that we are not only talking about an activist who wanted to see women become lawyers in Italy and wherever else in Europe. We are talking about an activist who wants to defend downtrodden criminal defendants. All her, as I recall, all her cases, all her clientele, I'll use the word loosely because she could not actually have a client. All her clientele were poor and downtrodden people who needed representation and who had no money. And so you had another level of activism. And I'm pretty sure this is the way it was for her. To the extent she could practice, she was representing, people who were poor and downtrodden and in criminal predicaments and who were innocent. It was interesting to find that you have the activism operating on both levels.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, Gideon, the law that made public defenders a constitutional right. That's 20th century American law too. Mm-hmm. So, in terms of being able to have a lawyer back in 1885 in America, there was no automatic right. Times have changed an awful lot.
Yeah, but one thing that was in the movie, and I don't know whether they, did this to attract viewers or what, but there were 2 or 3 really interesting sex scenes where people were, standing there in the room talking to each other naked. There was one scene where Jacobo.
Yeah, full body. Yeah.
Full body. Yeah. You saw it all.
Yeah.
And Jacobo was in one of those 19th century bathtubs with a prostitute, and she walks in, and then he stands up, and as you say, full body. And of course, you can see the whole prostitute too. And with fairly interesting colloquy at the time. And it didn't bother her one bit. She was
No, it
an
didn't slow her
activist.
down.
She was a modern woman, a modern now woman, a 2023 woman is what she was, and didn't bother her one bit. Anyway, then there are some sex scenes where she's, enjoying herself with the men in her life, and you get it all. As I said before, she's a beautiful woman, and I'm sure she's a very successful actress in Italy. But that kind of, if you thought this was an old stuffy 19th century movie that
Oh
didn't have
no.
anything, no, no, no. It wasn't only the language; it was the full-bodied sex.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I know. And he had it in the very first episode, and it does reoccur, as they say.
It does reoccur. So,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
anybody's interested in sex out there, they'll get a thrill in the first few minutes of the movie. It opens that way, and then if you're patient, you'll see some more.
Yeah. That was part of the amusing thing, because all of a sudden he's jumping out the window in the
That's
opening
right,
scene in order because he wasn't. Yeah.
right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it had a kind of la boheme quality to it in terms of Lydia's relationship with her landlady, who was always knocking on the door asking for money, and ultimately she had no money. And there was this very interesting, kind of emancipation issue where I guess it was Andrea came around and he visited her room, and he wanted to pay off the landlady so she wouldn't have this problem, this la boheme.
Right.
I don't have the rent problem, and so he was paying off the landlady, and she said, no, no, you can't do that. This is my debt. I don't want any men paying my debts for me. I'll pay
Right.
my own debts. Thank you very much. And Andrea, which was very endearing, he said, "Okay, I'm gonna give her the money anyway. It's a gift from me to the landlord, so the landlord should be nice to you."
But then she had him still because she was disbarred and didn't have the income. She still ended up having to move in with her brother.
Yeah. She had relationships. I think it's worth mentioning. She had relationships with the three principal male characters in the movie. Of course, her brother and I found there was a character dynamic between them, which was very appealing. He started out very stiff, very brittle, old style that women should not practice law, and he agreed with the judge and the prosecutor. But then he kind of changed at the end.
He evolved.
Evolved, yeah. And so they had as you said before, they had a very affectionate relationship ultimately, even though their childhood apparently was not exactly what you would want. And Dario Alta, the actor who played Andrea, was, I guess, her true love. He was the one that she spent more time in bed with. And ultimately, and I would like to explore this with you, ultimately, the series ends with Andrea taking her away from all of this, taking her to New York City.
Well, wait a minute. It ends with her having to make the decision whether she's going to go to New York City. It doesn't actually tell you what her decision is. And it turns out, I mean, when you look her up, I mean, she ended up staying in Italy and continued to fight for rights of women. But that was from the series. You had no idea which way she was really going to go. So I mean, it was very, very curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger.
It's a cliffhanger.
He was in a carriage heading for a ship to go to New York, and
Right.
she was about to jump into the carriage, and you didn't know whether they were going to go together. But it also it opens the possibility of whether Netflix will do another season, a sequel for all of this, because it's so ripe. They left themselves so much room to do a sequel. But
yeah.
they haven't agreed to do it yet. That's a cliffhanger also. And they've been getting all this mail from people who want to see a sequel because there's so much possibility for a sequel. What do you think?
Yeah.
What are they going
I
to do?
mean, a sequel would, yeah. I mean, with that kind of ending, I mean that's how so many of the American TV series in the end of a season. I mean, it's not a Dallas ending where but it's close to it in the sense that you really don't know which way she's going to go, and the characters themselves, because they have evolved so much. I mean, even the brother's wife has changed to a certain degree. We haven't talked at all about the daughter, who is in her own situation that she's not at all happy with, and is getting more and more advice from Lidia,
Yeah.
which is counter to what her mother wants.
Yeah.
So I mean, you've got all kinds of storylines that they could take this in a number of different ways, and then doesn't necessarily have to be a law show at all, given the particular characters, which is part of the reason why you probably were giving it a 10 plus.
Well, I just love the way Matilda DeAngelis operated with the other characters. She was so cute, so feisty, so smart, and there was something so strong about her. And I'll bet you 5. That's pretty much. It was well cast. This was well
Oh,
cast.
very well cast.
Because I think Lidia Poët was really like that. By the way, I'd like to add, Lidia Poët never married, either Andrea or anyone else. She never had children through her whole life, and she died in 1949 at the age of, what is that? Way into her 90s.
93.
93.
Yeah, no, she had a full life.
Person. Yeah, full life. And all the while she was an activist. She was the totally committed activist, even to the point of helping, the daughter of that family break away from the old traditions in Turin and doing what she wanted to do in terms of her romance. So Lidia was completely committed to activism and to
modern rights, co-equal rights.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that shows in every scene, every act, and it's all clothed in the 19th century, but she is really a modern woman, way ahead of her time, 100 years ahead of her time.
Right. Yeah, that was part of what really got me, was just how far advanced she was, because I kept thinking about when you and I first started practicing law, the number of women was relatively small.
Yeah.
And now, as I said, I don't know what the count is in Hawaii in terms of licensed attorneys between male and female, but I bet you it's pretty close to 50-50, and it's heading more up with the female count as opposed to the male count. So definitely different times.
And you and I saw that evolution, in the 20th century. And
Absolutely.
I'd like to tell you a short story. I hope we have time for this. One of my classmates was a woman by the name of Lucy Commissar. She was in law review. She was very smart. And a few blocks away from NYU Law School, there was a place called McSorley's Old Ale House, which was, interestingly enough, it was owned by a woman, but women were not allowed to drink there. They could not come in. And the duty of the barkeepers was to keep all the women out. And they would have this ability to sniff out women. And if they found a woman in the bar, they would throw them out in the street. This had been going on for 100 years. Well, Lucy Commissar was an activist lawyer and very smart, sort of like Lidia Poët, actually. And the very first thing she did when she passed the bar in New York was she sued McSorley's Old Ale House to force them to allow women inside, and won. And it changed McSorley's Ale House from 100 years of practice to being, more advanced. And in terms
Yeah.
of women's rights. So, that was when you and I were in law school, just coming out of law school. There was this emerging, what do you want to call it, Lidia Poët kind of mentality among activist women lawyers, and it's still the case, actually.
Well, it was shortly after you and I got licenses when certain private clubs in this city were kind of pushed um, to allow women to become members. There's
Yeah,
a couple that are pretty well known that were all male for quite some time.
yeah.
So it isn't just Italy that had a problem with equal rights, but at least the Italians did, for a lot of it did it with a sense of humor,
So I read
or
one.
presented it with a
I,
sense of
re-
humor.
I read one review, Steve, that really caught my attention. Is why is the Lydia Poet story relevant today? And the answer is, or in part, in any event, that we're going backward today. That women's rights around the world, this is kind of linked to the emergence of autocracy. Women's rights around the world today, they're not expanding the way they have been. In fact, in some places, they're going backward. And so this is a story that is it's not just 19th century. It's not just a woman activist that died in 1949. This is a story that is relevant in many places in the world right now where women cannot practice law. For that matter, look at Afghanistan. They can't even go to school, not even school, nothing.
Oh, it's disgusting what's happening in Afghanistan.
So I think the makers of this movie were trying to make that point as a relevant point of discussion, a relevant point of advocacy for women right now today. So that was very impressive to me, and it's one of the reasons I like the movie so much. The other reason I like the movie so much, and this is something that comes out of my experience with ThinkTech, the production values were outstanding. The lighting, the sets that they chose, the way they put the characters together, the way they made their editing cuts
Oh yeah.
for one remark against the other remark and how these people engaged in a conversation. It was so excellent. It's, you can't not watch it. It's magnetic. Anyway,
No.
what are your final thoughts about this? Where do you put it in our world of Guttman's Garage? Where does it fit for you in terms of worthy or unworthy, and what rating would you give it?
Oh, it's definitely worthy. I don't know about the 10. I was thinking more 9 because it is, but it's people should take the time to see it. It's a 4-part series, and the time will go very quickly.
Yeah, I couldn't put it down. It had all the touch points for me, including, as you mentioned, the sort of the Perry Mason, the Perry Mason, and yes, the crimes were simple, but they were also intellectually challenging because you didn't know how this was going to end. You didn't know what particular twist she was going to find in order to exonerate her client.
Right. But she always found it. And like when Perry Mason with the confession. So it became real clear. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I give it a 10. I was thinking about trying to push that to something higher than our scale, but for this discussion, I'll give it a 10, and you're giving it a 9. So this is in the range of movies that are certainly well worth watching.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Steve. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another one, and we'll find a way to explore the present through reviewing movies that maybe talk about the past.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.